Who's winning? And who's up shit creek without a paddle? This is your stop for unbiased election projections with BS free talk, analysis, and one cranky politico's insight into the very future of the world you live in. Broadcasting from the gateway to the motherlode in Waterford, California. This is the Election Recon Podcast. And now, he's carpet-bombing partisan zealots back to the Stone Age by delivering cold, hard reality to the fanatics first class. Your host, Army veteran, political operative, and election junkie, Josh Whitfield.
Welcome to the Oasis of Reality. We are back for our second season of the Election Recon Podcast after an entire year off the air. Again, this is your no bullshit stop for a look into the political world from a veteran's point of view. This is first and foremost a podcast show for veterans by veterans, but it's also for the rest of you civilian types in the world who just need a breath of fresh air from all the bullshit, all the BS that you get in your everyday mainstream media. So we promise here a fact-driven analysis of elections. Have you ever just wondered what is really going on? I got one news channel saying this from the right, another news channel saying this other thing from the left. It doesn't make sense. I just want to know where things stand. Well, that's what we provide for you here. Again, I'm your host, Josh Whitfield, political junkie, nerd, geek, and former Army veteran. My colleagues, Jeff Rockwell and Lauren Mayfield, also military veterans, the Marines and the Air Force, respectively. And the three of us represent here at the Election Recon Project the right, the middle, and the left. And we really started this because we all were in the military, and we all got into politics after the military, and we're kind of disgusted with how the way things currently are in the world, with how the media is, with how terrible the polling industry is, and how everyone is in the tank, right or left, in the media somewhere, whether that's talk radio, whether that's television, whether that's digital, whether it's social media, all of it. It's just nonsense. It's just nonsense out there. And we decided, you know what? No matter what happens in the result in any election, the right wins, the left wins, moderates win. We're just going to present the facts so everybody has just a little bit of understanding of where the election currently stands. We put a model together. Really, Lauren is the mathematical genius behind the model. Her and I put this model together that we tested in the 2020 election, and it nailed the popular vote, and it missed all but two states by just the slimmest of margins. Georgia and Arizona in the presidential election nailed 40, all but one of the U.S. Senate candidates, I should say. Little off on the House in 2020, but not by any egregious margins. We played around with the model a little bit, nailed the New Jersey and Virginia governor's elections in 2021. We were one of the first groups to say that Youngkin is going to win the governorship of Virginia. And we took a lot of heat for that. A lot of people did not believe that ever-bluing Virginia could go red again. And everything we saw in the data, everything that our model showed us here at Election Recon suggested that Virginia is not as blue as people would lead you to believe, despite the last few cycles, presidential election cycles, I should say. But enough of all of that nonsense, okay? I want to talk just for a couple minutes about how the world has changed so much in 2 years since we've been back on you. I 2 years ago in the 2020 election, I talked quite a bit about how dangerous these divisive times are, how polarized, how tribalistic the country has become, and it's sad, really, and it hasn't gotten better. It's gotten worse, if anything. We really predicted the right's backlash in 2020. We were seeing it in all the data we were looking at about a distrust in the elections process in the country and why and how that's dangerous, whether those fears and concerns from the right are founded or otherwise, and the intolerance to hear concerns from the right by the left about the security of elections. We have a problem in this country. I'm going to tell you exactly what that problem is. It's a failure to communicate. It's a failure to talk to each other across the board. It is so tribalistic now. Nobody on the left back in 2020 would even consider the fact that impropriety or fraud had happened anywhere. And nobody on the right would consider the fact that despite isolated incidents of impropriety or fraud, the entire election system is not rigged. And both of those things are true, yet one side will not talk about it to the other side. And that's historically dangerous. And the 1860s should show us what happens when we have a failure to communicate, like the old song says. So, without further ado, this podcast, first and foremost, is about elections. We're elections geeks. We love it. We eat it. We sleep, talking our sleep about red versus blue. So, let's go ahead and take a look here at the election snapshot, as I like to say. We're first and foremost going to take a look at the president's job approval, which really drives a lot of the midterm elections historically. You can see it in the data over and over again, that especially in the U.S. Senate, the presidential approval really matters in these midterm general elections. As you can see here, from start to finish, at least I hope you can see here, because we're playing with this new video system and stuff, and I'm an Army grunt and not technically sound, so please forgive me if you can't see it here, but I hope you can see it here, that the president's job approval is hovering in the Real Clear Politics average at 36.8%. That is abysmal for any president. We are looking at 1 in 3 voters at this point, rounding down, who think that the president of the United States is doing a good job. And you cannot get there just on Republican anger and angst and anxiety alone. Independents are swinging 2-1 against the president, and 1 in 5 Democrats are telling us in polling that they not only are they upset with the president's job approval, they may not vote for him a second time around. That is very, very dangerous for any president to be at. To put it in perspective, Donald Trump, when he did hit this low in 2017 in his first or only term, and maybe first term, because he may run again, but he was only here for just a little bit. It wasn't sustained like we're seeing now, and he started to make a recovery after this summer. Okay, summers tend to be a lot of protests going on. Summers are just kind of bad juju for politicians all over the place. This is really bad. Nearly 60% of the electorate in the aggregate is pissed at the president. This is not going to go well for the Democratic Party in the midterms. It's one of the biggest reasons why we believe that the red wave is inevitable. We believe that here at Election Recon. What we don't know yet is how big of a red wave is it going to be. And it's largely driven by the electorate's frustrations and anxieties about how President Biden is doing his job in the White House. That's just fact. That's not a partisan talking point. I think any reasonable-minded Democrat would agree with me. The White House is not done. This is not a strong White House, and the world is in a tougher, darker place than it was a couple of years ago. We have the situation in Ukraine. We have really the world as close to the brink of a third world war as we have been in, maybe since the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the, the disaster of Operation Able Archer, and all this, or when the Russians shot down a Korean air jet during Ronald Reagan's term. But this is a sustained problem in the world. You have inflation, the economy. All of this is just driving the president into the height of unpopularity. And most voters understand that not only is he the leader of the United States of America, he is also the leader of the Democratic Party, and it will play down ticket. We'll talk more about that as we go on. Let's take a look now at the generic ballot. This is what we call the generic ballot test. Here's some of the public polling that's available. Of course, in our model, we get our hands on some private polling, and we stick it all in there as well. At least the private polls that are gifted to us by people we know in the business. But this is a pretty good snapshot. Republicans are sitting at 1.8% in the aggregate today. You see the three most recent polls there. Quinnipiac, Politico, Morning Consult, The Economist, and YouGov all have the Democrats ahead, but they've had the Democrats ahead for a long time here through the majority of this Republican flip. As you can see here, in November of last year, there started to be a real flip. We saw that as well as we were testing our new model in New Jersey and Virginia. The undecided voters really broke hard for Republican candidates in 2021, and really haven't turned back since. Really what we're seeing here is a very consistent shift of the electorate towards a preference for the Republican Party to be in power to check this unpopular president. And we're not really seeing the electorate enthusiastic about Republicans. They're just stuck in a two-party system where they know right now in the last 2 years, whatever hopes they had that a Democrat-run government was going to work is not working. That is what they are saying here. Now, not everybody. A lot of Democrats are loyal, and they'll never switch their vote. They're going to vote blue down the ticket. They believe in progressive and democratic values, and 40 to 45% of the electorate is going to stay loyal to the Democratic Party. That is a fact. That is true, and it's the same for Republicans on the other side. But depending on who you ask, I tend to believe true independents are more in the 10 percentile range. Some people would say closer to 20, somewhere in between. A lot of subjectivity there, because people lie to pollsters all the time. You could, in this business, you call somebody and you make your best scientific deduction and reason to decide are they truly independent or not. Us politicos have a ton of tools. Pollsters have a ton of tools to try to decipher a faux independent from a real independent. But basically, we've seen the independents shift to the right here, and we have seen a significant shift of Hispanic voters to the right, largely driving this. We've seen that in special elections in California, in Texas, and in Florida. And the Latino vote, which has been reliably Democrat since 2008, I mean, hard in the paint Democrat since 2008. George Bush, when he was president, George Bush Jr., did well for Republican with Latino voters, high 30s, low 40s. That's really well for Republicans. Republicans are really playing to really possibly, maybe not this election, but certainly if the trend holds up into 2024, they might start winning the Latino vote. There's no question in my mind the Latino vote will be at least back to George Bush levels in this election, if not higher. And that is just bad news for the Democrats. And we're going to talk about why that is in future shows as we go on. But this is a look at the generic ballot. To put it in perspective, during the 2010 a red tsunami year, right? We had a red tsunami where Republicans just wiped the floor with Democrats in 2010 in President Obama's first term. Republicans in the aggregate were up only 1.5 points in that aggregate. And they've been consistently hovering about 1.8 to 2.3 here. So they are at this point in time, in my opinion, in a better position now in the overall environment. The electorate's much different than it was a decade ago, of course, but they are in a better environmental position now than they were in the summer of 2010 before the November 2010 elections. Bad news across the board for Democrats. Again, Democrats who are listening to this podcast right now, I am not trying to be hard in the paint. The fact of the matter, we deal in facts. If you go back and listen to our podcast from 2020, we said a lot of things that upset Republicans and brought reality to them in that election. But there's just nothing in the data right now that's good for Democrats. Nothing. A lot of people talked about the Supreme Court decision and how that was going to move the electorate. In my opinion, it has not moved the electorate. Maybe by 0.5 point. Maybe you can make that argument, but I personally don't see it. I don't think the abortion or the Dobbs decision really matters here in the minds of the voters. I believe in every poll that I see, it's consistent. Public, private, right, left, independent. People are suffering at the grocery stores, at the gas pumps. They are pissed at the world, and right now they only care. If you're a candidate from either party, hear me on this. The working class people of this country only give a damn about who is going to make their quality of life better, who is going to protect their kids, and who is going to bring the cost of living down. Those are the three dominant topics across any poll of repute, and they are consistent in virtually every poll that we've analyzed so far in the 2022 cycle. And I just don't think the Democratic Party gets it right now. Personally, they're just not talking about these. Some are. There are some members of Congress out there trying to get their party back online. But right now, it just doesn't seem the message is resonating with voters because they're clearly about to take out their frustrations on the Democratic Party. And the Democrats are going to have to come up with some type of messaging other than Trump is bad, Republicans are evil, conservatives hate, women, and all these ideological issues can have an effect when times are good, but times are not good right now. The economy's in shambles. We're coming out of the COVID thing. Inflation is hurting everybody, small businesses especially. The working class folks just don't care about that right now. And it is an out of touch message, in my opinion, from the Democratic Party, and they're going to have to fix it. I'm not saying Republicans are in touch with the electorate either. I would argue the Republican Party has a massive messaging and marketing problem on its own. But when the folks are pissed, and they're pissed right now, their dissatisfaction with government is in the 70th percentile. 7 in 10 voters don't trust their government to lead right now, and that's a real problem, for the Democratic Party because they're the party in power. So independents, true independents are they're really free agents in every cycle, every 2 years, and they can very easily give their vote to the left one cycle and flip over and go all right in the other cycle. And that's really what we're seeing here. Plus the seismic shift of Latinos coming to the Republican Party because again, they tend to be more socially moderate or conservative than the rest of the Democratic Party. And I really think some of these decisions like Dobbs are hurting the Democrats with the Latino base more so than Republicans. And that's why we've kind of seen a wash in the Dobbs decision. That's my subjective opinion, but I think there is some empirical evidence to support that. That being said, again, if this trend holds, and it's been fairly consistent since late January of this year, if this trend holds all the way through to November, it is going to be a devastating year for the Democratic Party. Still time for the Democrats to fix some of it. I don't think that there's a realistic chance that they're going to retain the House of Representatives. They could very well could hold the Senate, which would be a really big deal to the Democratic Party. But the House seems lost. State legislatures and governorships seem lost right now for the Democratic Party. Everything we're seeing is fixing up to be a very good year for Republicans in this cycle. Speaking of the Senate, we're going to take a very quick look. This is from 538.com. Generally in the business considered the best of the best, I guess, the prime election forecaster. Interestingly enough, we trended right of them in 2020 in our model. Our model right now says 50-50. Actually, 55 in 100. Our model says Democrats are going to hold the Senate. That's just our baseline. That could change. I personally suspect that it will change. I see trends in our model which try to hedge against knee-jerk reactions to polling. Polling is only 1/4 of what our model takes into consideration. You can read all about our methodology and how our model works at electionrecon.com. It's right there for you. But our model, anybody who's tracking our model should keep in mind that it is always going to react slower to the polling and to the issues at hand. Basically, for our model, an issue or a scandal or a change in the national discourse or the environment electorally has to be sustained over a period of time, 2, 3, 4 weeks, for our model to weight it with any real consideration. It's really built not to be knee-jerk reaction because the polling's been so terrible for 2, 3 cycles now. We really wanted to put a model together that is dependent on polling, and polling still really is the best tool that we know of to take a snapshot of what's going on, right? But it is imperfect. It is flawed. There's a reason why there's margin of error, and I'm personally very critical of polling because I see a lot of bias. 2020, we saw a lot of bias, an egregious amount of bias to the left in a lot of these polls, and there's a couple reasons for that. Republicans tend not to talk to pollsters as much as Democrats are more open with their opinions. But really the answer of 2020 was the media was just so in the tank, so blinded by their hatred of President Trump and the Republican Party. There's no other explanation. They intentionally put their thumbs on the poll and they weighted what they thought the electorate was going to look like in their polling in a very biased way that seemed to really just kind of make them happy. It was what they wanted to see, and that's really not what happened, despite President Biden winning the presidency by a slim margin, all things considered. Not the popular vote, but popularity does not win you the presidency in the United States. It's the Electoral College, and really, couple tens of thousands of vote swings in just a handful of states in the other direction, Donald Trump is reelected for a second term. That's just fact. It was also very close in 2016. Few states swing a few tens of thousands of votes the other way. Hillary Clinton's elected president. So we are very divided state to state, as you all know, in this country. The Senate is going to be the real story in this election. It's very interesting to me that 530. I would have suspected. I did not check 538 before we ran our first baseline. I would have expected Nate Silver's model to be left of us, to be honest. So it's not. That's probably more bad news for the Democrats. But our model, his is really based off a lot of polling and a lot of trends. He's a mathematical genius. I've had the opportunity to meet him in 2008 when he was just getting started with this whole 538 thing. But yeah, I mean, his is more heavier influenced on polling. Ours is a little more hedged against it. So you're going to see this slower reaction of our model to the trend. So I suspect our model will continue to trend to the right, especially the closer we get to election day. But I've been wrong before, and the math surprises you sometimes. So does the electorate. The electorate's fickle. So right now, it's a toss-up for the Senate, says 538. We agree at Election Recon. We believe that the Senate, this is the 272 win map that we use for us here at Election Recon. We pretty much have it 50-50 with very little change in the overall makeup of the Senate. This is a fairly favorable map for Republicans in this environment, but really 2024 is a very favorable map for Republicans. So if Republicans can win control of the Senate now, they're going to look to expand on their control of the Senate in 2024, where the map is very favorable for the Republican Party. So the Republicans are going to benefit from this environment, putting the Democrats on defense. However, the Democrats have out fundraised Republican in these Senate races by a lot, a significant amount. And we look at that. Our model takes that into consideration. Whether you like it or not, money plays in elections. Yard signs don't win elections. Newspaper endorsements don't win elections. Voter contact wins elections. Take that to the bank and cash it. And money is the number one fuel into the machine and how these people and their campaigns contact voters. So our model takes fundraising very seriously, and I suspect that's why our model has the Democrats still retaining control at this hour. But despite the massive fundraising advantage, the environment is still not conducive. There's a lot of headwinds going on for the Democratic Party as well. And the National Republican Senatorial Committee did not get all the candidates they want. The MAGA and the Trump effect has played in various states, and there are far more conservative and less establishment candidates than I think the party bosses in Washington D.C. would have liked. But that shows the grassroots enthusiasm of the right wing of the country right now, and that to me is also kind of bad news for the Democratic Party, because if the right is energized at the levels they were in 2020, it could spell doomsday for Democrats across the country in a major way. So it's kind of a look at the Senate. We're just going to briefly talk about as we'll go more into depth with this week to week as we continue our show. But Pennsylvania here is in the tilt category, Wisconsin in the tilt category, Arizona and Nevada in the tilt category, and in Nevada it is so close in our model. Laxalt trails Cortez Masto by 1/10 of a point in our model, and that's really rounding up. It's much closer to 1/100th of a point. So we're seeing Nevada trending to the right in each cycle. This could be the cycle where Nevada is once again a red state. Has not gone red since the days of George Walker Bush. Arizona, another Blake Masters probably going to be the Republican candidate out of Arizona, challenging the Democrat Senator Kelly, an astronaut. Be an interesting race. Arizona, one of the most fickle states in the union. They'll swing it right and left. They're a true swing state, but we're seeing some real on the ground trends of Arizona moving to the right as well. These two states could very easily fall into Republican hands. And our model, Masters only trails the Democrat incumbent by 0.5 percentage point. A lot of other people out there in the social media world and the news world talking about Washington and Colorado being in play. We really don't believe that. They're both still likely for us in our model. In Georgia, a lot of polls have Herschel Walker, the Republican candidate, down against Raphael Warnock, the Democratic incumbent who won a special election in 2020 and is up for the full term this year. The things that we're seeing, despite the polling showing Walker down 3-up, we just don't believe that Brian Kemp is going to outperform another statewide Republican by 5, 6, 8, 9 points like some of these polls would have you believe. We have a lot of concerns with the methodology of these polls that are showing Walker down against Warnock by 3 points consistently, 3 to 5 points, depending on the polls that we're looking at. Right now, our model doesn't believe it, and it actually has Walker up by almost a full point. even though we have Kemp almost certain to win the governorship in Georgia. So North Carolina is in our lean category, but it's very close to being a likely state. Wisconsin's going to be interesting as well. Ron Johnson's just not very popular. The Republican incumbent in Wisconsin doesn't really, in our opinion, meet the prototypical Wisconsinite that Wisconsin voters, especially Wisconsin independents who will decide this thing, are looking for. However, in this political environment, even though he is underwater in popularity, the Democratic Party is even further underwater as a party versus him individually. It's tough to knock incumbents out, especially in the U.S. Senate. And so for that reason, we still have Mr. Johnson up by about 1.2 points in our model. New Hampshire will be, and Pennsylvania will be the real battlegrounds of New England. I would say of any Democratic state that you don't expect could fall to the Republican Party, it would be New Hampshire. But Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, in our minds, would all have to swing to the right for New Hampshire to be in play. But if early in the night, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada fall quickly to the Republican Party, we'll definitely be watching New Hampshire. And if New Hampshire's decided clearly for the Republicans on election night, we're going to start to pay close attention to Washington and Colorado. So that's kind of like the string of defense for the Democratic Party right now. But at this hour, we still feel fairly confident in a New Hampshire victory for the Democrats in the Senate. So that's a look at the election snapshot today, Thursday, July 21st, 2022. Normally, we would have a special guest for this next segment in the second half of our show. We do not today. I went long just kind of talking about the poll, all this stuff, the election snapshot, just kind of resetting our show here. I'm going to talk a little bit about polling. We promised 2 years ago we would do a show on polling. We never did. We rate the polls and weight them. We rate and weight them in our model from a 1 to a 10 or 0 to a 10. Now 10 is virtually impossible to achieve, and a 0 is virtually impossible to achieve. But basically, how we rate our polls we do care about did you call the race correctly? Okay, but that's like betting red and black on the roulette table, right? We don't necessarily, that is important to get it right, and that's what you see here in accuracy of the polls that we've analyzed. Now we don't rate. We have to have at least 10 polls that we have analyzed ourselves, line by line, all the crosstabs, everything, in the last 4 cycles. So to be rated by us and to be your poll to be put into our model has to be at least 10. So that's where you're getting these accuracy ratings. Did the poll call the race correctly? But we care a lot more about even if a poll called a race incorrectly, how close were they to the final results? What's the margin of difference? Is it possible for a poll to predict a Democrat win, but a Republican has won by 0.2%, and they projected a 0.5 point win for the Democrat? A 0.7% difference is pretty good, and we trust that poll, even though they got the race wrong, a lot more than we do a poll that will say, oh, this candidate will win but still be 10% off. We saw that in a lot of mainstream polling in states like Wisconsin and New Jersey and Georgia and all this stuff in 2020, where they had these ridiculous outlier polls showing a certain candidate up 10, 12 points in a state. They would never be up by that much. And even though they called the state correctly in how we rate polls, how we grade the pollsters, you get deemed pretty heavy for having what we call raw bias. And if we can show, in our opinion, well, not in our opinion, in our analysis, if we can show in the polls that we've analyzed that a certain pollster tends to be biased to the right or the left by a significant margin, that hampers the rating quite a bit as well. None of our personal opinions go into it. Um, there's a lot of polls, both in our top 10 rated polls and in our bottom 10 rated polls that I personally don't agree with. But my personal feelings on an individual pollster don't matter. It doesn't matter to anybody here at the Election Recon team. The results, the math is the only thing we care about. So that's where it comes from. I'm sure there'll be people on the right going, PPP, how are they top 10 in your ratings? Well, they are right now based on the polls that we've analyzed. And yes, we show a Democratic bias, and they're right 3 out of 4 times, and but they've been fairly, in the polls we've analyzed, have been fairly close. That's why they're 10. A lot of Republicans are going to rip their hairs out. A lot of Democrat going to rip their hairs out of Trafalgar Group being in our poll. And you can see we put the R and the D there. These are people who admittedly say, like, look, we predominantly work for Democrats, we predominantly work for Republicans, or Republican or Democratic pollsters. That's what that R and D means. That doesn't bother us as long as they're right. We don't care if they tend to be right or left. And I know too, just because 2 years ago he was so popular, Big Data Poll and Richard Barris's operation. There's going to be a lot of folks from the right who are like, why is Big Data Poll not in here? We haven't been able to analyze a whole lot of his polling. He appears, we definitely take a look at what he says. He's a very interesting guy. We believe he gets it right far more than he gets it wrong. If we were ever to analyze 10 plus polls for a Big Data Poll, I'm sure they'd be put on the list, but we just can't because we don't have enough data to make a rating decision. So these are our polls. There's a lot more pollsters than this that are in our model, but this is the bottom 10 and the top 10 of all the some 45 polls that we currently have plugged into the model. Now, in our model, you have to have a rating of 4 or better to have any effect on the model. Any poll that's rated below 4 does not get plugged in. So these ratings change with each cycle that we analyze the polls, and so a pollster that is 4 or under 4 can get themselves out of 4, and a pollster that's above 4 can put themselves below 4 in our ratings if they screw it up and get it wrong. So this is just purely an analysis on the raw mathematics of, do these polls get it right or wrong, and how much partisan bias in our analysis have we seen. So you can see, 6.4 is tremendous partisan bias. That is really dragging down SurveyMonkey, even though SurveyMonkey has been right 74% of the polls that we've analyzed. They've called it right. But somebody who's in the tank 6.4% to the other side, not ever going to see the light of day in our model. So that's kind of how the polls work for our model per se. So I've gone long. You guys know I'm terrible about going long. I could talk about politics forever. I'm getting the look over here. So we're going to move in. We're going to change up the show a little bit this season. We're going to have, we feel like we got away in 2020 of really hammering the veterans point of view. Again, this is really a veterans political show first and foremost. So we don't care if only 2,000 people watch, because there's not a lot of veterans out in the world. This is just kind of a what's what for the veterans interested in politics out there, but also for the wider audience, again, to get a breath of fresh air from the pollution of nonsense that's out in the mainstream media. We're going to do a segment every week called the Grunt's Perspective, and I'm going to pick a news story that has passionately touched me, and I feel like I need to talk about from a military veteran's point of view. This will be the only time in our show there's opinion, other than the questions that you guys sent in the 3-pointer segment, which will continue as well. So this week's topic for the Grunt's Perspective is Dave Chappelle and cancel culture. Dave Chappelle has been consistently attacked for what it seems like over a year now for his comedy and his opinion and his artistic expression on certain things. And I personally have a real problem with it. But before I get into it, let's go ahead and take a look at Dave Chappelle's thoughts on the cancer culture. And just today, actually, he had a show canceled in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for his views and opinions and his comedy and his art. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute. Let's take a look at Dave Chappelle's response to cancel culture.
I want in this audience to know that even though the media frames this, that it's me versus that community, that is not what it is. Do not blame the LGBTQ community for any of this shit. This has nothing to do with them. It's about corporate interests and what I can say and what I cannot say.
That like actually gets the hairs on the back of my neck to stand up, because he is so right. He is so right. Okay? This is a free country. We have the First Amendment. Now, listen, venues, I'm not saying it should be against the law for venues to cancel Dave Chappelle's shows. The venues also have a First Amendment right to say, we don't want your kind of art here and all this, but it is dangerous. It is inherently dangerous for the transgender community. A lot of this stuff is because he made some jokes about the transgender community, but this is what comedians do. They make jokes about everybody. I've been watching Dave Chappelle since I was a little kid in high school. I love his comedy. Has to be Dave Chappelle 1 and Bill Burr 1A for me personally. I think a lot of veterans, a lot of grunts, dark humor is kind of how we handle a lot of our shit up here in our head, okay? But we get, I think, better than any other community through struggle and hardship and the things that we've had to do about us just having our opinions and our expressions being what we want. So I would be willing to bet 2 dimes to a nickel that the veteran community is overwhelmingly in support of Dave Chappelle. Because listen, if you don't want to hear the man speak, don't go and listen to him. But this type of cancel culture, where somebody says one thing, or they make a joke, or they make light of something, or even if they're serious about it and it's their artistic expression, to have the platform and the voice to say whatever it is they want within reason. There's there's reasonability here, okay? I don't come at me with fucking this nonsense about well, Josh, what about Nazis, and what about this Aryan Nation or the Black Panthers? And I don't want to hear about none of that. There's obviously they're running into, it's the whole running into the movie theater and calling fire when there's no fire type thing. Okay, there's reasonability there, but Dave Chappelle is a comedian. Comedians are controversial by nature. That would be saying like a painter can't be controversial, or a rapper can't be controversial, or whatever. Okay, first and foremost, the man has a right to say whatever he wants, and people have a right to go pay money to listen to him say whatever he wants. And I'm somebody who would pay a lot of money to go see Dave Chappelle. I've seen Dave Chappelle in a show before. It's an excellent experience. He is, in my opinion, the best comedian of our generation. And this attack about just the whining, the pining about his jokes about one specific community is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Okay, we've got this. Listen, American veterans and soldiers did not die for a country throughout the multiple generations of our past for a bunch of whining, cancel everybody, deprive people of a living social society. It's just not what America should be about. If you don't like Dave Chappelle, don't go to his shows. Don't listen to him. There's a lot of people out there, and a lot of me, I don't watch a lot of TV. I can't stand it. It's just all negative all the time. And guess what? I don't turn on the damn channel. Okay? Cancel culture is dangerous. And the reason I'm bringing it up today, it is dangerous in terms of its divisiveness in our country. It is by fiat. It's tyranny. By tyranny of control of the airways, or the social space, or the stage, or the movie theater, or whatever. It is tyrannical and classing people out. Basically, cancel culture has gotten to the point, I think we can all agree, if you have a Me Too situation and it's provable, and like the Harvey Weinstein thing, I think the whole country can agree that that scumbag should be freaking tossed out an airlock. I think the whole country can agree, certainly veterans agree, that Epstein should have been shot in the head years ago. Okay, that might be controversial, but my goodness, how many women's lives would have been saved if business was taken care of and he was arrested or somebody defended these? It's just horrific. And you know what? Before I get out of control, screw the sentence that Giselle Maxwell, whatever her name is, his little right hand lady, she got like, that woman should be in prison for the rest of her life, and she should be thankful for it, for the terror that she brought on, so many young victims. But my point is, we can all agree with that. We can all agree with that. But there has to be a limit of reason and understanding. A comedian making his jokes is a form of artistic expression. Dave Chappelle is not a pundit on the news media. He is not in elected office. He isn't the leader of anything other than his fan base, and the man should be able to say whatever he wants. And we, like I said at the top of the show, it's all about communicating. There are things that Dave Chappelle says that I don't agree with, but I laugh my ass off. I laugh my ass off because he's funny. And that, as a connoisseur of comedy, and I go to a lot of comedy shows, I only give a crap about if you make me laugh. I'm there to have a good time, to relax, and to laugh. And Dave Chappelle does that for me. He should not have platforms taken away. It's all about it's the same stuff we see on college campuses all across the country. Even in my home state of California, Cal Berkeley used to be the centerpiece of freedom of speech, and now it is one of the most tyrannically controlled colleges over who can say what anywhere in the country, and it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. People should be allowed to say what they got to say within reason, okay? Anywhere they want in the United States of America, especially, on public property or land. Cancel culture has got to be checked. It has gotten out of control, and my heart goes out to Dave Chappelle on that. Is the Grunt's perspective this week. Very quickly going to be moving into the three-pointer, because this apparently I'm not supposed to go over an hour, but we will. This week, we don't have any questions because we're just relaunching the podcast off the ground. So Lauren and Jeff, my teammates here at Elect Recon, have submitted some questions for me, but you can submit your questions to the show, and we will answer 3 of them each week. You can email us at electrecon, at electsingularrecon@gmail.com, submitting your questions, or you can hit us up on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook with a DM. Ask your questions away. You can be as mean as you want. You can tear us apart, make fun of my weight. I don't care. We got thick skin here, and we will pick 3 questions to answer. Just because your question doesn't get answered in a particular show, we reserve the right to recycle them and bring them on for the next show if there's a plethora of good questions out there. So please send your questions in. This is going to complete the podcast for this season, will be the 3-pointer segment. And without further ado, I'm going to get into it from my colleague, Lauren. Lauren, who is our resident Democrat on the show, by the way, says, how can Democrats stop the bleeding this year if Dobbs and the Supreme Court did not make a dent? I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. I think a lot of Democrats were probably hoping for more of a swing back to the left on the abortion and the Dobbs decision. I'm not going to debate abortion here on this show today. The facts of the matter is we may have seen about a 0.5 point movement to the left from Dobbs. We'll have to wait and see. A lot of noise in the polls, of course, and 0.5 point really isn't that much of a movement, especially in this political environment. My answer to that question, Lauren, is there again. I think I talked about it earlier in the show. Democrats are going to have to find a message that connects with the folks, the working class folks, and they're not there. They're not resonating with people who are hurting in this economy right now. The gas prices, the cost of food, the cost of wood, the commodity markets are completely out of control. Still, I was just in New York a few weeks ago, and as far as you can see off Rockaway Beach, there's just container ships and cargo ships just anchored, waiting for a spot in the harbor. The economy, the global economy is really messed up right now. And the voters aren't buying that it's all Putin and Russia and Ukraine, because we experienced problems during the COVID situation. And I think a lot of voters in their minds, whether you agree with it or not, a lot of voters in their minds have made up their mind about who is responsible for the economy, and they're laying it at the feet of the Democratic Party right now. So I don't know what Democrats can do, but they're going to have to find some type of messaging that resonates with the working class voters that could contrast against Republicans' messaging on the economy. And the Democrats have to have a better message than Republicans are bad, Donald Trump is bad, conservatives are bad. Okay, the working class folks can give two shits about that right now. That's just a fact. They care about, again, quality of life, cost of living, and who can protect their kids. And the Democrats are losing this election right now in all the data we have because the Republicans are winning on all three of those issues. And that is just facts. The next question comes from Jeff, our resident MAGA right winger here at the Election Recon project or podcast. And Jeff asks, what with almost everyone predicting a GOP wave this year, why is our model still projecting a dim hold of the Senate? Another good question. I think I talked about this earlier as well, Jeff. Again, our model is built. Lauren and I built this thing to be unique, but to also hedge against the errors of the various methodologies that we have put into our quadrivial model, as we call it. So you can, again, check our methodology out at electionrecon.com. So far in 2 cycles, 2020 and 2021, it's been a very accurate model. I'm anxious to see how well we do in the House this year and the Senate, of course. But our model is always going to lag behind the national trend a little bit because of how we build it to hedge against all 4 sectors of what makes up our methodology, especially the polling. But really, I think it's what's really the difference right now in these tilt states for us in our model is the fundraising advantage that Democrats have enjoyed so far coming out of the primary season into the general election season. But I suspect as GOP challengers are selected in the primary processes and we go to a more one-to-one matchup, that Republicans are going to do much better in our model in the Senate. So my gut feeling is that probably by the end of this thing, Republicans are going to be favored in our model to control the Senate, if only because the data is telling me that late-breaking voters are probably going to go against Democrats, just like late-breaking voters went against Republicans in 2018, which was a wave year against Republicans in President Trump's midterm in his 4-year stint. So we're seeing a very similar environment, but reversed, where voters, especially centrist voters, are very displeased with the party in power, and they're ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater and give Republicans a fresh start. If the president's unpopularity remains as high as it is, if the generic ballot remains where it's at, it would indicate to me that most late deciding voters are going to break heavily for the Republican Party, and we can see significantly higher margins of victories for Republican candidates than we're seeing projected right now. So hopefully that answers your question, my friend Jeff. Lauren gets 2 questions because, me being more of a center-right Republican, I feel the Democrats, to hedge it out, to even it out a little bit, Lauren gets 2 questions today. So Lauren finishes it up with, are extreme GOP candidates going to soften the blow to Democrats we're projecting this year? Well, Lauren, as you know, I don't like adjectives like extreme and all this because that's subjective. Somebody who wears a MAGA hat could be very reasonable to millions and millions of voters in the country, and somebody who wears a pussy cap and marches with the women marches and all that could be very reasonable to millions of other voters in the country. So I don't agree with extreme candidates per se. I mean, you have very progressive candidates like AOC and the Squad, and Bernie Sanders, who's practically a communist. And you have, Boert and, various Republican candidates out there, Donald Trump, who, may be right of center, and then you have your establishment folks, and then your real moderates and all that. So that's all very subjective. That being said, I think the extremes are going to be decided by the voters themselves in their individual states. So a MAGA candidate is probably going to do better in the state of Georgia than a MAGA candidate would do in the state of Nevada in this current cycle, if that makes sense. Certainly in like Mississippi, a MAGA candidate is going to probably win against a moderate or establishment. But you have states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin where a more moderate candidate is needed to win, I think 50+1% of the electorate in those states from either party. But it is interesting. A more conservative, I'm not going to use the word extreme, Republican could win this cycle and go down heavily 6 years from now because the mood of the electorate has changed. So I don't know. I think we're too tribalistic right now. I think even moderate Republicans and never Trumpers have grown so dissatisfied with the left that they're saying, all right, you know what? Check for the team. And I think there's a lot of Democrats who feel the same way. Like, man, we're really pissed at Joe Biden. We think he's doing a terrible job, but we're still Democrats and we're going to still come home for our team. Check. I think we're going to see a lot of tribalism as we have seen in the last couple of cycles, and I'm not too sure the quality of the candidate is going to have as much. It will obviously have some play. Like Fetterman, I think for the Democrats out of the Eastern Seaboard, a lieutenant governor there, I think that's a very strong candidate for the Democratic Party, and that could be in a very close election, that could be the margin of difference. Whereas I think Johnson from Wisconsin for the Republicans is a very weak candidate, but because of the political partisan environment where we are right now, he's still likely to win. So that being said, I just don't think it plays as much. Will it have an impact? Sure. But it's going to be in those states that are razor thin. I think for the most part, 80 to 90% of the electorate has already made up its minds in this election, which is why we're very convinced that the Republicans already are going to control the House of Representatives, because the voters are not, a lot of voters, 90, probably in my opinion, 90% of voters, they know who they're voting for and whether or not they're voting, and their minds have been made up, and something short of an act of God is not going to get them to change their minds. So that is where I am at with it, and what I believe is the answer to your great question there, Lauren. So I'm already 10 minutes over time, I'm being told, so I am going to finish with that. It's great to be back here at the Election Recon Podcast, the oasis of reality. It's great to be back with you guys. I love talking about politics. As you could tell, I can run my mouth, have diarrhea of the mouth all day about politics. Feel free to comment, like, subscribe, comment. You can find us 24/7 at Elect Recon or Election Recon on social media. That's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, you can find us online at electionrecon.com. Email us at electrecon, it's elect singular, recon @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, good, bad, or ugly. Be pithy, be flamboyant, be vulgar. We don't care. Okay, we're veterans here. We have thick skin. Again, this is first and foremost a political show for veterans, by veterans, to cut through the bullshit of the mainstream media. I'm Josh Whitfield. This has been the first episode of Election 2022 here at the Election Recon Project. This is the Election Recon Podcast, and we'll see you next week.